In this opportunity, we are going to talk about the weight of the terminal value in the valuation of a company. In a previous video that we called Horizon and Terminal Value, we reached the following conclusions. First, a firm cannot add value forever. Second, because of this, the horizon, meaning the period during which we project the cash flows, is defined as the period during which the firm is expected to invest at reinvestment rates ROIC exceeding the discount rate WACC, meaning that the firm will add value during this projection period. So the firm is not expected to add any value after the horizon. And second, the terminal value perpetuity will grow at the inflation rate, meaning that it will not have any growth in real terms. Whenever this approach is considered too pessimistic, for instance, when we are dealing with a company that is growing very fast and is expected to have many years of strong growth ahead of it, then the solution is to divide the projection horizon into several stages. First stage, in which we project the cash flow as we usually do it, and then subsequent stages in which we assume declining growth rates in real terms. Say, a 5-year period growing at a 10% rate, followed by another 5-year period growing at a rate of 8%, and so on until we reach the final year of the horizon. And starting at that point, we will have our perpetuity growing at the inflation rate. The question is, to what extent an inflation, a perpetuity growing at the inflation rate at the end of the horizon is acceptable. After all, when we assume perpetuity growing at the inflation rate at the end of the horizon, we are making assumptions that will hold forever, starting from the end of the projection period, forever until infinite, until perpetuity. So these assumptions are very relevant. So the question is, to what extent this assumption is relevant? So what we usually do is that we seek for this perpetuity not to have a very high weight in the total value of the firm. The question then is, what is an acceptable weight for the terminal value? And when we talk about weight, we define this weight as the present value of the terminal value at time zero as a proportion of the total value of the firm. Unfortunately, there is not a clear figure for the acceptable weight of the terminal value. Some analysts recommend a weight not larger than 20 to 30%. Although we do not count with a correct figure, we still can check what happens when we change the characteristics of the cash flow vis-a-vis the terminal value. What happens when we do this with the weight of the terminal value? So what we are going to do is that we are going to see what happens when we change the magnitude of the cash flows during the projection period, what happens when we change the horizon, the projection horizon, and what is the final impact of the present value of the terminal value when we change these variables. And that is what we are going to do with this following example. We start assuming a horizon of 10 years. And during this projection horizon, we are going to assume a cash flow, a constant cash flow of 100, an annuity of 100. And we are going to assume also a discount rate of 12%, a WACC rate of 12%. And then we define something called the increment. The increment is how much we are changing in our sensitivity analysis the annuity. So what we are going to do is that first we start with 10 years of projection, an annuity of 100, and then starting in year 10, a perpetuity with no growth, also of 100 forever. Then we see, okay, what happens if we increase the annuity during the projection period? If we increase it from 100 to 110, or 120, or 130, or decrease it to 90 or 80, etc. Always in increments of 10. Also, we will check what happens when we change the horizon. We project for 10 years, or for 12, or for 15, or for 8, or for 5. So let's see then what is the result of this sensitivity analysis. We obtain this table. In this table, we observe that we have basically a horizontal axis that represents the increments. So how much we are changing the magnitude of the annuities. And a vertical axis that represents the horizon, the number of years in which we project the cash flows. And the numbers in the table represent the weight of the terminal value as the total weight of the value of the firm. So the first conclusion is that as the average yearly cash flow becomes larger, meaning as we move to the right in terms of the increment, the weight of the perpetuity falls. Well, that makes sense. Okay, the larger the relative weight of the cash flows, the less important will be in present value terms the terminal value. Also, as the horizon increases, meaning as we move in this direction, of course, the less relevant will be the terminal value as well, because of course the more important will be the cash flows that we are projecting, and the farther away will be the terminal value. If we assume a threshold of 20%, let's see what happens. Well, we differentiate between the figures in red and the figures in black. Okay, the figures in red in this area here represent those cases in which the present value of the terminal value is above this threshold of 20%. So we see that we have acceptable values for the terminal value, acceptable weights for the terminal value only in the white area. So the conclusion is then that we must at least project 15 years in order to have acceptable terminal values. And when we have increments below 20%, 15 years is not enough. We still need to project 20 years. Okay? So, in general, using our model, we conclude that a horizon of at least 20 years is desirable if we do not want to have too large a weight for the terminal value. The other analysis that we did in this model was to check what happens when we change WACC. As you should expect, as we decrease the value of WACC, the present value of the terminal value will be larger because we are discounting at a lower rate. So what happens when we decrease WACC? Well, if we bring WACC to a minimum of 5%, which is more or less the long-term risk-free rate, if we bring WACC to a minimum of 5%, how many years we will need to project in order to have an acceptable weight for the terminal value? So the conclusion is that we need to project at least 30 years. So we finish this presentation with our general conclusion. Our general conclusion is that it seems that the horizon must extend for at least 20 years in order to assure a moderate weight of the perpetuity in final firm value. And also, when you have very low WACC rates, this projection should at least extend to 30 years. And that is all I wanted to share with you in this opportunity.